experiment!
Stellaris Developer Diary 257 is out and summer is coming. What does this mean? Well, basically, patch 3.4.4, the next patch we're going to be getting, is going to have a patch notes out, not this week, we don't have it yet, but that is coming next week. In this week's Dev Diary, we're going to be discussing things that are a little less concrete and a little more ethereal. Now, basically what that means is that we're going to be talking and looking at things where they are not telling us exactly what is going to change, just giving us some examples of ideas they are working on. And because of that, I'm going to be using today's Dev Diary to speculate massively. So stick around as we look at what could be coming to Stellaris in the very near future. But what is going on? What are they talking about in this Dev Diary? Well, basically, every summer, they find themselves at Paradox in the dev team with a bit of free time to experiment with different systems that strike their fancy. Now, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe this is due to the Scandinavian summertime, and basically, for those of you who don't know, pretty much everybody in Denmark, at least, I assume it's pretty much the same in Sweden and Norway, go on vacation for 3 weeks every summer in the middle of July, but at slightly different times, and that makes it really hard to get any business done during July, and I think that also means it's quite hard to get any meaningful development done unless people are working on their own individual projects and not having to check back in. But that's just my personal speculation. I could be wrong there. I'm happy to hear from anyone if they think there's another idea. Now, what has happened in previous summer experiments, they actually yielded the lithoid traits, which changed the way that Stellaris devs made species packs forever, and the very first trials of industrial districts. So some massively game-changing changes were experimented with, discovered, I suppose you could say, during these summer experiments. A lot of the time, they don't actually work out, and they wanted to make that clear here, or they've needed a lot of iteration before they've actually turned into something usable. But that is fine. These are intentionally framed as experiments, and therefore at a much lower pressure. But rather than doing a review of what did and did not work out this summer, they are instead giving us a preview of some of the systems they're currently looking at experimenting with. So I believe this is all Custodians team experimentation. We're not looking at the Nemesis team, I forget what they're called, the team working on the DLCs. This is specifically Custodians changes. And they want to make very, very clear there is a caveat here, and that is that these experiments may or may not even pan out. Nothing is guaranteed, and there are no timelines for release, even if they don't work out. So basically, they've written themselves a blank check here to say anything they want, and that's kind of nice, I think, actually, in a lot of ways. We're going to be finding out what they would like to look at, what they might like to change, but we must know that it doesn't necessarily mean it's definitely going to happen, and we can't expect it anytime in the near future. With all of those caveats, provisos, that sort of thing out of the way, the first thing that one of the devs will be looking at and fiddling with is the relic balance. Iggy, one of the devs, has asked to look at relics and has written up proposals for a balance pass upon them, and these are his own words. Relics are meant to be fun and game-changing. They are supposed to be powerful and unique items that can change the course of your empire. The issue, however, is that they are not all equal. So, with a future update, Iggy hopes to at least narrow the gap between the relics a bit, and has mainly split the relics into 3 different sets or categories. First, there are the event-based ones that are fine to have if they are niche and have semi-powerful effects, such as the Omnicodex or the Blade of the Huntress. Second are the precursor relics, which should be strong and useful for every single empire, though they are not promising the Javorian procs will be top tier for pacifists, or the Psionic Archive will be the best machine relic, but they will at least have some sort of neat effect that can actually be used. Crisis relics, which are awarded for defeating the crisis, should be a bit of a victory lap. You have won. It should not give you 30 society research. Yeah, that's a bit of a dig at the Praetorian relic. Yeah, absolutely. Now, with all of that in mind, Iggy will be looking at every relic and attempting to bring them in line if needed. There will be a lot of buffs and a few nerfs, but hopefully they will overall feel much more rewarding. Okay, but what does all of this mean from Iggy? Well, I think the first thing we can definitely take from this is the Crisis relics. That is, the Brood Queen, the Contingency Core, and the Warlock from the Unbidden are all going to be getting buffs of some kind. I am quite sure the Praetorian relic is going to get some big buffs because that's the worst one around. That extra society research as a passive is simply diabolical. I am looking forward to that, and to be quite honest, I don't think there can be any balance issues with making these relics massively powerful. By the time you've defeated the Crisis, you're almost certainly the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and if you're not, and you get your hands on a Crisis relic, you should be able to become the eminent power everywhere in the known universe. That makes perfect sense to me, and I see absolutely no issues from a balance perspective of buffing these Crisis relics right up into the stratosphere. Then there are the Precursor relics, which on the one hand we've got things like the Javorian Pox giving us a specific bombardment stance that is really good against biological life forms but completely crap against machines, and that one is, in my opinion, not great because it's such a niche use. And at the other end we have something like the Cybrex Warforge, which gives a flat monthly 5% alloy bonus, which is really good, and you're allowed to build Cybrex Warform armies, which are pretty much the best armies in the game, and then it has an active effect for 10,000 minerals and some unity. You can convert those minerals directly into 5,000 alloys, which in the early to mid game, if you get your hands on this, is phenomenally powerful. I hope they don't nerf that one, but I could see them nerfing the Cybrex Warforge to bring it into line with the others. If you're unsure what I'm talking about here with the relic power levels as well, I do have a Stellaris relic tier list. The link to that is down in the description below. You can check that out if you want to. But I think the most interesting changes we're going to be seeing are from the event-based ones like the Omnicodex and things like the Blade of the Huntress. You see, I believe the Blade of the Huntress is very powerful. Some don't quite agree with me on that, I think, but that extra 20% sublight speed, beautiful. Possibly it's 25, I actually forget, but that when compared to something like the Omnicodex, which gives you 3 random pops, yeah, I think there could be some rebalancing here with these event-based ones to make some of them more powerful and some of them less powerful. I especially hope that the relics we get from the Leviathans are upgraded a bit. They, generally speaking, in my opinion at least, are some of the least powerful relics. I'd also like to see a relic for the crystalline entities. That would be quite nice, as well as possibly a relic from the Amoeba system, a more Alveo, and also possibly getting a relic from killing the Tiyanki, destroying their home system. If we could get a relic for wiping out one of those 2 population breeding grounds, I think that should give us a relic just like the mining drones gives us the Surveyor relic. And then at that point, something like the Tiyanki Preservation Act would then be quite an important thing to pass in the galactic community early on, therefore preventing any empire from getting their hands on a powerful relic. That would be quite an interesting balance and dichotomy and give a bit of interesting oomph to the Tiyanki resolutions. But those are just my thoughts on the relics. What else do we have? And if you're enjoying this video, please experiment with that like button. Traditions is also something they're going to be looking at. Now, you may be a bit interested here because Traditions got a massive rework not very long ago, only in patch 3.1, the LEM update. Alfrey, however, is planning some experiments looking at introducing new tradition trees, and I think this is really cool. Part of what the new LEM system gave us is going to be the ability to bring in new tradition trees and new ways of playing the game. They are looking at how gating tradition trees behind various in-game triggers might also influence the game. There have been some interesting ideas suggested about introducing tradition trees that are locked behind, for instance, ascension perks or origins, and they're interested to find out where those may lead. I think possibly having some tradition trees locked behind ascension perks would be very cool. I would be a bit wary of the origins because that would mean once you've picked your origin, if you haven't picked a specific origin, you may be locked out of a very powerful tradition tree that might become very necessary, I don't know, for certain aspects of gameplay. I don't know which traditions they actually want to lock behind these things, but we're going to have to find out where that leads. We definitely do want new tradition trees though. Some of the interesting tradition trees I think we could get So now we are heading into more of a speculation mode. I think it would be really, really good to have a tradition tree that is specific to Megacore. I know there is the mercantile tree, but that's more of a trade value only tree. I would love to have a tradition tree that helped buff branch offices and help with branch office type things. I think that would lead to more interesting Megacore gameplay style. That could help make Megacore, I know it is definitely its own unique playstyle at the moment, but it could give it some buffs, some extra uniqueness that would give more power. Just focusing on the Megacore branch offices in a Megacore tradition tree I think would be a mistake. I would absolutely love to see it if Megacore could set up a branch office and through careful maneuvering, growing the branch office, spending lots of money, end up as the de facto owner of the planet. Now I'm not talking about military control here or possibly anything like that. I'm talking about political and economic control to the extent that they would be siphoning, I don't know, 70 or 80% of the income from a specific planet if they go far enough down this Megacore tradition tree and far enough down upgrading branch offices in such a way that gives them close local political and economic control. I think that would be really cool for an interesting new playstyle that would allow you to go out there and kind of conquer the galaxy without seeming like you've conquered the galaxy. I think it would also fit in quite well with some of the new Overlord vassal playstyles we've had since Stellaris Overlord. Another tradition tree I think I would like to see is a private military company tradition tree that is not locked behind the Ascension perk. I mean, possibly it could be locked behind the Lords of War Ascension perk, but I'm more thinking here a tradition tree that is going to increase the number of private military companies or mercenary enclaves that you're able to set up, and then give them buffs and benefits and give you buffs and benefits for using them. I think that would be quite a cool tradition tree to have as well. While we are talking about specific tradition trees, I think it would also be really cool to have a new tradition tree for each of the Ascensions locked behind taking the final or possibly just the first of the 2 Ascension perks in each of the Ascension paths. That's the biological, psionic, and synthetic Ascension paths. If we had a specific psionic tradition tree that you got access to after you unlock the Mind Over Matter Ascension perk, you would then take that as your 3rd tradition tree. It would have a load of extra buffs that help you with psionic into the mid and late game, and possibly with the other 2 you had tradition trees that helped you a bit earlier in the game when you are a little underpowered as a synthetic or biologically ascending empire, because psionic empires, if they are ascending, they have all of their power early and they will tend to peter out a bit later on in terms of the power curves, whereas the synthetic and biologicals, they tend to take a little bit of time to get going and then are very powerful in the late game but aren't so powerful early on. So if we got tradition trees for each of those that address their specific weaknesses and were locked behind the different ascension paths, I think that would be really, really interesting. But those are just a few of my thoughts on the tradition trees. You've probably got some of your own thoughts. Please let me know what you thought of my ideas and tell me your own ideas down in the comments below. Deep in the code mines, Caligula Caesar has been finding new places where we could expand the uses of multi-threading and experimenting with the way modifiers are calculated with a particular eye towards the late game. I hope this leads to some success. I really do. It would be great if they could expand the use of multi-threading, though I wouldn't hold out too much hope here, to be perfectly honest. Now, why am I being a little negative? So when you, as far as I know, I don't specifically have, I need to caveat here, I don't specifically have a background in game design. I do have an IT-based background, okay, and I'm going to say that, but I don't have a background in game design specifically, so don't consider me an expert. Now, with that being said, I would expect if you've got a game like Stellaris based on a game engine, now don't think that because that game engine first came out in 2004 or whenever it was, that it is the same Clausewitz engine from 20 years ago. It's not. They've made updates to it. It's a different game engine now. But that being said, the core of the Stellaris game does not, as far as I can tell, or as far as I know, in the way that it calculates these resources, in the way that it works out how your economy gets to at the end of every tick and updates all of that, which is important and must not be wrong, or must not be very wrong. It does not have concurrency or parallelization in the way that it's done, in the way that it's programmed. Therefore, there's only so much you could do and only so much you could change if you're adding multi-threading in to change the way this is done in the late game without starting off from the very beginning again, without starting from scratch. I would not expect any massive benefits to really be made. And when I say massive benefits, I mean, start from the ground up, assume we're going to parallelize every calculation and try to solve those concurrency issues from that perspective right at the beginning, rather than the place we are now with, years and years of code written up. We've got quite a big tech debt on all of that code that all has to function together in the Stellaris game, and we are adding to it. So we cannot fundamentally, I don't believe, I may be wrong, so feel for any of the devs who ever read this to call me out on this, but I don't fundamentally believe we can change the way that the game works at a kind of a base level where we've got all of these components built on top that rely on that. What I think we'd need to do if we wanted to get multi-threading working everywhere, and therefore having a Stellaris running on all of your different cores as you run it, is not only start from the beginning, but change the way we've actually implemented the game and implement it from a perspective that we're going to accept some concurrency issues. There might be some issues with the way we calculate resources, for example, but we're going to try to resolve those, and we're going to optimize speed and performance over moment-to-moment technical correctness and definition. Now, that might be a massive issue with something like a game where we as a player are trying to exploit that, and therefore it might not even be possible. I think everything is possible to some degree, but yes, I'm not going to pin massive hopes on changing things around over this summer. I do think we're going to get some positive benefits from this, don't get me wrong. I do think it will be a positive journey to go on to try to implement more multi-threading and that sort of thing, and change the way we modifiers are calculated and looking at improving the late game. I think that's always beneficial. But I don't, and I'm going to be kind of reasonable here, I don't think we should expect game-changing results from this at this stage. So temper your enthusiasm is all I want to say here. If you're enjoying this video and the other videos on this channel, you can support this channel in a number of ways. You could either become a channel member or a Patreon. You could buy something from the Humble Bundle store using my affiliate link down in the description. Or if you're watching this video live with me in the premiere, you can use a super chat. Until the 15th of June, you can get your hands on a great city building game by Paradox Interactive, City Skylines, for as little as €1. You can also get the full bundle on Humble Bundle, including 9 expansions and 21 add-ons for less than €20. The link is down in the description below. And now we get to what the game director himself, Eladrin, is going to be looking at over the summer. He's going to be looking at fleet combat balance. Now, as you might know if you've watched any other videos on this channel, I've had quite a long dive, quite a long look at fleet combat in Stellaris. I've done quite a bit of testing. I have worked out which weapons work in specific situations against certain ship types, how certain ship types perform in certain combats. I'm almost near completing it. I'm hoping to get it out before I go on my summer vacation, actually. But I am looking at how the new defense platforms and orbital rings stack up in terms of the combat balance. I've done a lot of testing. I'm going to be presenting my results to you very soon. But what is Eladrin looking at here? Well, they are going to be looking at a few things. A late game role for destroyers and cruisers, and therefore providing some incentives for mixed fleets. I think mixed fleet incentivization is something a lot of players have been interested in. They don't like the fact that, well, if you want to optimize your gameplay, you basically need to run mono fleets of either all battleships, possibly with some Titans thrown in there, or all destroyers in the late game. What this could mean is that we get an entirely new system that comes into place to deal with this, to change up how the modifiers work, how some of the targeting works. Basically, I think we could be moving in a direction a little bit more like the Hearts of Iron fleet combat. Now, the Hearts of Iron fleet combat is a little obscure and a little confusing, especially for newer players, whereas Stellaris does tend to be very simple. You've got fleets and ships, your ships shoot at other ships in other fleets, that's it, that's the end of story, basically. The time you get to shoot at, the range of your weapons, that's the most important thing, generally speaking. But apart from that, your ships just fire when they get a chance, and if they get too much damage, they die and or run away. So changing up this fleet combat balance, providing incentives, I'm very interested to see what they do here. They're also interested in increasing the length of a fleet combat, reducing the dominance of alpha strikes. Right, what's that talking about? Basically, at the moment, If your ships get to fire first, if they have a longer range, you tend to have a mathematical inevitability that you will win, even if both fleets are balanced in terms of the fire output or power output of their weapons. Why is this? Well, the fleet that fires first will knock out enemy ships first, meaning the other fleet will get to fire second, and even if they started with a greater combat potential, they'll generally now have a lower potential output, a lower fire rate, or lower fire power, I should say, than the first fleet that just had the Alpha Strike. That means if you fire first, you get to whittle down the enemy numbers. They fire with reduced output, meaning you'll take less damage in turn, meaning your second salvo will be of greater power than if you were to fire second. Okay? And that is why Alpha Strike is so massively dominant at the moment in Stellaris. And by increasing the length of fleet combats, possibly that could be increasing the range at which fleets trigger and enter the combat stance. So your fighters, for instance, will deploy earlier. That could change something about the Alpha Strike potential. I mean, I know there's quite a few players that would love to basically have a Battlestar Galactica style of gameplay where your cruisers turn up or your carriers turn up at the edge of the system, let out their fighters, and then sit at the edge of the system nice and comfortable while the fighters do all of the main work, and then possibly run away if the fighters are losing the battle. Personally, I don't think fighter dominance is the way to go here, but we're just going to see what they bring in. Next, they want to experiment with existing counters, that is tracking, evasion, and accuracy mechanics as well, and this may also end up providing a role for smaller weapons. Right, at the moment, basically what the testing I have done has shown is that point defense is ineffective. Why is it ineffective? Well, by taking point defense, you're reducing your overall damage output and instead attempting to counter some of your enemy's damage output. In all of my testing, having actual point defense weapons is worse than having regular weapons, because it is always better to simply destroy an enemy ship, eliminate them from the combat entirely, than attempt to blunt a small proportion of the incoming damage. You'll end up doing more damage overall, you'll have a greater survival rate if you ignore the point defense weapons and instead just take regular weapons. And I hope that's what they're talking about here. Now, they're also talking about changing up tracking, evasion, and accuracy. That could be interesting. I don't know exactly where they're going to go with that. At the moment, high evasion is very, very important. The main problem that high evasion ships have is they don't usually get access to very long-range weapons. They definitely don't get X-slot weapons. Destroyers do get large weapons so you can have neutron launchers on them, but that's about it, so their actual damage output tends to be lower. I mean, if you simply gave X-slot weapons to corvettes, they'd become the most powerful ships in the game. But I hope they don't do that. That would be crazy. But that could be something they do. They want to provide more of a role for smaller weapons. I'm really unsure what they're going to do, and I'm very interested to see what they change. They also want to improve ship behavior, so based on assigned roles, that is the roles assigned by combat computers, that's picket or swarm, picket, line, carrier, and in between there's, I've missed one, yes, artillery. So those different roles should mean that your battleships behave, or your ships behave in different ways. However, carrier battleships, if you have a point defense laser, will, because they are very, very proud of that point defense laser, attempt to zoom forwards and charge into the thick of combat, into the melee, and then use their great point defense laser. Yes, that's not perfect. We want our carrier battleships, if they have the carrier computer, to act as, wait for this one, folks, you're gonna be mind blown here. Yes, that's right, we want them to act as carriers. So yeah, that might be a little overly sarcastic, but I'm really hopeful they do make a change here to the way combat computers change the actual stance of ships. I wouldn't actually mind it if they changed combat computers entirely and went to a more of aggressive, defensive support stance. Possibly we could set some ships to be kind of aggressive, they go and attack the enemy, defensive, they defend, we get a support stance role which tries to stay out of combat and therefore will be targeted less by enemy ships, but that would require an entire rework of the combat computers. I'm thinking of a system somewhat like the Star Rulers 2 ship assignment system. If you've played that game, that's what I'm thinking of here, and I think that could be really cool. But basically these are very ethereal experiments they're going to be doing, or that Eladrin, the game director himself, is going to be doing with fleet combat rebalancing, and there is basically no chance, he's saying, that this will bear fruit in the short term. I expect we're going to see changes here in the 6 to 12 month time frame at the very earliest. earliest. I am, however, very excited by this. Fleet combat balancing is the bread and butter of this channel. Actually, it's one of the first things I was doing and something I would be very interested in having another look at if they change everything up again. The very last thing they are mentioning here as well is that there are more achievements coming. So the artists had so much fun with the Overlord achievements that they cornered us and demanded they add some extra to the species packs. Yes, these aren't actually experiments, but once they figure out what they'll do and they'll send them live and implement them, and here we are. Now, what are the previews? We've got the first 6. On the left we have looks like a fixer-upper. I'm assuming this is going to be something to do with Gaia Seeded, possibly. I'm not entirely sure, but I think this is going to be about taking a Tomb world and making it into a Gaia world, possibly. Then we have the, well, that's ominous. There's a robot here, computer. I assume it's going to be about finding some sort of machine intelligence thing, some sort of fanatic purifier. I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, I mean determined exterminator. Not entirely sure. Very interesting. This next one looks amazing. Is that the Swolfin from the Overlord trailer? Question mark. Now, basically, it's the Anakin scene from Revenge of the Sith, and those could be the younglings behind him. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but I assume this is to do with killing your Overlord or something of the sort. Can you smell what the lithoid is cooking now? I'm guessing this, the 4th in the line, is going to be about taking biological pops, turning them into livestock, and eating them. That's the only thing I can say there. Om nom nom, I believe this is going to be about taking plantoid pops, turning them into livestock as well and eating those. Yes, there's a lot of slavery-based achievements in Stellaris, I think, or at least this could be what we're seeing here, and that's absolutely hilarious. This last one, more om nom nom. A lot of our achievements reference eating things, don't they? Now, I believe this is going to be about possibly letting a scientist die to a Leviathan, something like that. I'm not entirely sure. We seem to see some sort of Cthulhu or Chthonic type creature in the background, possibly a giant oversized angler, and we're dangling one of our pops in front of it, though that could just be a scientist, something like that. The last one here is something they've called the Darkest Timeline. You rolled a 1, time to eat the stick. Maybe this is an achievement for unlocking that very low percentage chance psionic entity that will become your patron. Yes, basically the crisis for psionic empires. I've suddenly forgotten what it's called. Let me know if you remember down in the comments. 50 years of bliss and then your empire implodes. Possibly that's what this one's about, though I'm not entirely sure. I actually don't think it is though, because they did say species packs and that wouldn't be a species pack effect. They've also made it very clear to us that this isn't everything that is being worked on. Not everything listed here is being worked on. This is just the experiments. What is almost definitely coming is the previously mentioned espionage improvements that I believe is new espionage missions and some changes to the current missions we have, which is very exciting stuff. If you're watching this live with me for the first time, stick around because we're about to jump in and play in the Stellaris Entropy event, which you won't want to miss. Otherwise, we've heard quite a lot in this video about the systems they're looking at changing in Stellaris, but there is one type of system they're definitely not going to be changing soon because that's had quite a few big updates, and that is interstellar transport and logistics. If you'd like to know more about how to get things around in a big galaxy like Stellaris, click the video on screen now.